So even though we think that we're free, in actual fact, we're all junkies. Okay? We're samsaric junkies. Yeah, completely attached to external objects, completely mesmerized by the happiness of this life, unable to see anything beyond the happiness of this life. Yeah, and so thinking that all of our happiness comes from external things, yeah, from morning to night, always thinking, oh, I want this. And, at the beginning we think, oh, this is just, chocolate. I can give that up. Not a big problem. But then we start to really look at our lives and how we're constantly looking outside for something. Yeah, not only just ordinary, regular sense pleasure, chocolate kind of things, but, for love, for appreciation, for praise, for self-esteem. We expect other people to, be the source of our own self-esteem. Yeah, so we're addicted to hearing nice, ego-pleasing words. Because if somebody else thinks I'm wonderful, then maybe I can start to believe I'm wonderful. Even though inside I don't really think like that. Yeah. So being this junkie for praise, for sweet words, for comfort, encouragement, looking outside for measurements of success. What our family says being success looks like, what society says being success looks like, and constantly running after all of that, trying to be successful, thinking that if we're successful, then that's the meaning of our life. Yeah, and not having any awareness of the fact that we're going to die, and this whole dream bubble that we're spending our whole life creating is going to go like that. Yeah, our whole identity, everything we've arranged around us so that I know who I am and I have what I want, all of that in one breath disappears. Yeah. And the only thing that comes with us is our karma, and of course any dharma practice that we've done. But we usually haven't paid much attention to our actions or to our dharma practice because we've been so mesmerized by the glitter outside of, everything I can achieve, everything I can be, everything I can have. Yeah. And so we spend human beings spend most of their time running around looking for all of that. And then like this, it's gone. And just the karma remains to experience the result of. Yeah, so that's when we really look at it, it's not very satisfying, is it? Yeah. Now, of course, most of society doesn't see things that way. They see, there's this whole beautiful external world of pleasure and of things you can do and have and achieve and remake the world so wonderful, and there's just so much out there. And I want to do it all and have it all and reform it all and change it all and make it even better. Yeah, and that's how most people look at things. And so, under the influence of huge deception, huge mind so obscured, not being able to see things as they actually are, even in a conventional way. Forget about seeing their ultimate nature, even in a conventional way. So difficult. Yeah? And so we're really swimming upstream, trying to generate that, a correct view. And, people here understand us, and we talk about it, and we get little glimmers, yeah. And then as soon as we're with our family and old friends and in our old situation again, our new viewpoint seems so strange and so odd. And who would think like that when everybody else thinks like this? Yeah, and then we just go back to our old worldview and get really stuck. Okay, so, this is why strong motivation is really the key to the whole thing. And why it's so important to put ourselves in environments that will help us grow in the direction we want to grow in. Okay, to see the direction we want to grow in, to have some feeling of our potential, and then to put ourselves in the environments that are conducive for that kind of growth, because we're so influenced by the external environment, and we're so influenced by what other people think, even though what they think is just thoughts and blips of energy. We think what they think is so important. Yeah. And if they think something, it must be true, and I must be like this, and that must be valuable. And so we never stop to evaluate ourselves, and call forth our own wisdom and really check up for ourselves what is true and what isn't true. But we just, lay back and let everybody tell us, and we go along. Okay, so when we get some feeling for the direction we want to grow in, so important to put ourselves in situations that help us grow that way. Yeah? So that's, we've been talking about the Buddhist life and everything, but this is exactly the reason why the Buddha started the Sangha community. Yeah? Because he knew that it's so difficult. It's really swimming upstream. It's what the Tibetans call being a white crow. Yeah, crows are black. What are you doing being a white one? Yeah, and so the Buddha saw that we really need to be in a conducive environment with other people who have the same goals, the same worldview, the same perspective. And so that's why when people ordained, they were part of a community. In the early days of the community, it was a wandering community. People wandered. Maybe not, 40, sometimes 40 people or 50 people or 100 people wandered together, or 500 people. But sometimes, there was just a few people who went off and wandered, but they always came together for posada. Posada is the fortnightly ceremony where we confess and renew our precepts. So they always came together in much larger groups for posada. And it was very interesting. There's an annual retreat that the Sangha does every year, and where they, because initially the Sangha was they were wanderers, and they started staying in one place during the rainy season because the non-Buddhists did that, and people said, all you Buddhists are wandering all over during the rainy season, and you're killing insects when you walk, going on Pindapat, and you're trampling our fields, and why are you acting like that? So then the Buddha said, okay, then during the 3 months of the rains, everybody is going to stay in one place. Yeah. So one of the rainy seasons, they had the retreat, and then afterwards the Buddha was visiting, one community, and asked them, how are you doing, and were you harmonious, and they said, oh yes, we were very harmonious, we had a wonderful retreat. And the Buddha said, well, how did you do that? And they said, well, we didn't talk to each other. And we, everybody cleaned up after each other, but they didn't talk to each other. And the Buddha said, you foolish people, you're together, you should be learning and discussing the teachings together, and really helping each other to understand and helping each other to practice. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we usually think of retreat as being a silent time when you do your own meditation. So sometimes you have retreats that are silent like that. But other times you have retreats where, the real purpose is to discuss and learn from each other and share the Dharma. Because that helps everybody. Okay, so there's, I just wanted to review a few things I touched on last time. We talked a little bit about naturally negative actions versus things that were prescribed by the Buddha. So the naturally negative actions being actions like killing, stealing, unwise sexual behavior, and so on, that for, ordinary beings, almost everybody would have a negative motivation engaging in those things. So the Buddha made precepts about those, but then he also made precepts about other actions that themselves weren't naturally negative, in that it's conceivable that people do them with a neutral motivation or even a positive motivation, but those things were unbecoming for the Sangha, or those things were not conducive for a renunciate life, even though they were not naturally negative. So that includes things like eating in the evening, even taking intoxicants, which I find interesting, because in my mind I would think, well, why isn't taking intoxicants naturally negative? And then I thought, well, maybe, if you're sick and they need to do surgery, then of course, you're doing it with a neutral motivation. It's not with a negative motivation. Eating in the evening, people can eat with a neutral motivation or even a virtuous motivation. So there's many actions like that that the Buddha abandoned just because they weren't conducive for the monastic life. For example, with intoxicants, what happens is you get intoxicated and then you do all the naturally negative actions. Yeah, and this is certainly true. I mean, the people that I write to in prison, the incarcerated people, 99.9% of them were intoxicated at the time of their crime. Whether they would have done that crime had they not been intoxicated, they may not have. Yeah. So things like that. Then there's one about entertainment, singing, dancing, playing music. People often ask about that. Well, why is that? First of all, they say, why is that bad? I find it so interesting the way people phrase questions. Yeah, why is that bad? The Buddha never said it was bad. Yeah. The Buddha only said that's not conducive for a renunciate lifestyle. He didn't say bad, But it's interesting how our mind goes to bad and good, doesn't it? We don't go to beneficial and non-beneficial. We go directly to judgments on bad and good, moral judgments. Which is just completely, ridiculous, isn't it? Yeah. So singing, dancing, playing music, watching entertainment isn't bad. It isn't morally sinful. But it's not so conducive for a monastic lifestyle because When you sit down to meditate, all those melodies are going through your mind, all the dance steps are going through your mind. You're replaying all the movies that you just saw, you're replaying the TV shows, replaying the news. Your mind is distracted and preoccupied by other things. And it's very clear, isn't it? Haven't you had that experience? Yeah? And so you sit down, your mind's filled with that, and all these images of the movies, and then it evokes all these emotions. Oh, he kissed her. Oh, they're fighting. And, and it's so difficult to get your mind concentrated and calm. Okay? So, it's for that reason. Also, I know as a former dancer myself, and maybe some of you who are singers know this as well, singing, dancing, entertainment is a wonderful way to draw attention to yourself. Look at me. I am so entertaining. I do this and that and that. This wonderful voice, and I can act, and I can dance, and look at me. Right? Okay, so that mentality also isn't so good for monastic life. It's not very conducive for realizing selflessness, because it just creates a big I. Okay. Similarly, sitting on high and expensive beds and seats usually is, if we adjust that one to our culture, because now, we all sit in chairs. The purpose of that precept is to avoid arrogance, by sitting in a higher place than other people. Or a much more luxurious place, a more prominent place than other people. So, technically speaking, if your chair is higher than this, then you're breaking that precept. But in our culture, everybody sits in chairs like that. And, if you got on the bus and you sat on the floor so that you could keep your precept, it would be pretty strange. Okay? So, sitting in a chair in our culture is not a sign of arrogance. Yeah. Sometimes putting yourself at the head of the table, you have to see, because in our culture, that means you have more power than everybody else. Yeah. So do I put, when I enter a place, do I put myself at the head of the table? Do I put myself in the biggest chair? Or in the place, the sitting place of the most prominent position? Yeah, on the nicest place, so that people will look at me. Yeah. Or, what about beds? I want my luxury bed, so that I can feel like a queen, lying on my luxury bed that is just the right hardness, just the right softness. This wonderful comforter that's so nice, that matches the rug, and and my pillow that's just the right, hardness, softness, everything. I must be special to have this. So, very easy to get arrogant.
Yesterday you talked about everyone rushing to the Dalai Lama business.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes. Yeah. People forget. They forget, because I'm sitting on the floor. So how is that being? I'm not breaking the precept. I'm still sitting on the floor, but I want to be in the front row. Yeah, and I want to be in the front row towards the audience side, so that everybody in the audience can see that I'm on stage. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there's precepts like that. The one about not eating in the evening. That one, the purpose of it, there's a few reasons. One is sometimes people eat in the evening, then they sit down to meditate in the evening, they feel too heavy. Their body and mind is heavy and sleepy. So to avoid that, not eating in the evening. Another reason is that when they went on Pindapat in the villages, first of all, it was inconvenient for the lay people to have to give them food for 2 meals. It was really inconvenient for the lay people. And second of all, when they were going on Pindapat in the dark, they couldn't see. So, they were falling in cesspools, they were falling in sewers, they were, tripping over all sorts of different things. So also for the ease of the lay people and for the monastics' protection, then and then also not to feel too heavy, too sleepy in the evening, then there was that precept. Yeah, and then other precepts were formed because the lay people complained to the Buddha about how the Sangha was acting. Yeah, somebody had their chamber pot, used it, and then in the morning threw it, threw the contents over the wall, and it landed on somebody. And they said, "You're monastic, sir." So the Buddha made a precept: you do not throw the contents of your chamber pot over the wall. Even if you look. Yeah, because maybe the people, maybe they aren't there, but maybe they're coming there later on and they don't want the stuff on their land. Okay. So lots of things that the lay people found objectionable. There's one of them that the nuns have about not eating garlic. Yeah, and this is an example where the meaning of the precept is not what you literally think it is, and that is the story behind that was that there was one farmer who had a whole garlic field, and a nun was on Pindapat. He gave her some garlic, and then he said, "I have so much garlic, you can bring, a couple of people back and pick some garlic." So the nun went back, and she brought all of her friends, all of the other nuns. This whole swarm of nuns went to the garlic field, and they thought, well, he offered it, and they picked everything. And the poor farmer was like horrified afterwards because he was relying on his garlic crop, and they had taken everything. So nuns don't eat garlic, So, but you can see that the real meaning has nothing to do with garlic. It has to do with being greedy. Yeah, and so when people offer things, even though they've offered it, not taking, just taking it because they've offered it. Yeah.
Why did that not apply to just the nuns? Because that could be equally applicable to those nuns.
Yeah, you would think so. Well, this is part of the thing, that the monks' order was founded first. Okay, so when the nuns' order was founded, and as the Vinaya came into being, because remember, all the precepts were created only because there was a specific incident that happened. Then the nuns had to take on all the precepts that came into being due to the monks' naughty actions, plus the ones that came into being due to the nuns' naughty actions. The monks didn't have to do that. They only had to take on the ones created by the monks. Okay? Yes?
Well, didn't the nuns' order start about 6 years after the monks' order? And therefore there wouldn't have been that many precepts.
Right.
Most of the precepts would have come after the nuns were on board.
Right. But the thing is, because the precepts didn't start until about 12 years afterwards. But the thing is that we're dealing with how it came to be at the end of the Buddha's life and how it came to be in the time period immediately after the Buddha died. Okay, so for example, when the precepts were first made, I don't think that the Buddha had in mind all the different categories of precepts and saying, okay, this precept is a parajika, this one's a sanghavasesa, this one's a payantika. That the categorization of the precepts didn't come about until later. Yeah, but we're dealing with what came about, as time went on. Okay, so so there's a number of, actually the difference is, and then there's actually some precepts that the monks have that the nuns don't have. Yeah, so there's ones especially about flirting and being sexually aggressive and coming on to people, that the monks have that the nuns don't have. So, there's different things. In fact, there's an extra category of precepts for the monks that has two precepts in it that specifically has to do with this kind of thing, where you're relying on the testimony of a woman in order to decide what category of transgression the monk committed. Okay, so because he did something naughty, and they need to, the woman needs to say what he did. So it is very interesting to read some of the origin stories, because sometimes you think, like, okay, the precept not to kill. Yeah, you would think that the origin story would be something really obvious, like two people getting in a fight and one clobbering the other and killing him because they were mad. Wouldn't you think that that's kind of the usual situation for killing? That's not the origin story. Yeah, the origin story is that there was a group of monks who were meditating on the foulness of the body, because in the practice of the 4 establishments of mindfulness, one of the meditations on the body is really meditating on the foulness of the body. And so these monks, they didn't understand the purpose of the meditation correctly, and so instead of just having a feeling of like there's no reason to be attached to this body, they began to feel like this body is so totally disgusting, I don't want to have it at all. And so they started asking other monks to kill them so that they could be free of having such a foul body. And the other monks said, well, this guy's been meditating, he has some understanding, he's asking me to kill him, it must be okay. So the Buddha came back after a while, and this community of monks was like, not so many left, and he said, what happened? And then they told him the story, and the Buddha said, no, you cannot kill other people. So, it's not that the kind of origin story you would suspect, which for me is quite interesting, because in some way our mind could understand, oh, somebody's asking me to kill them, it must be okay. Like this whole movement toward euthanasia now. Somebody is asking me to help them end their lives, it must be okay to do that. They're asking that. Hold on. But what this precept is saying is no. Not even if somebody asks you to kill them is it permissible to kill. Not even in that situation, let alone you have a fight and clobber somebody. Okay? So I find it quite interesting in that way. Similarly, the one about celibacy. Yeah? You would think that it would be a very obvious story. Again, a monk falling in love with somebody and having sex, and then everybody starts gossiping. Okay, that wasn't the story. Okay, the story is, in ancient India, it was very important for families to have male heirs, because when somebody died, it was the son who did all the pujas and rituals and things like that sent the parents on to their good life. So there was incredible emphasis on having a son and your son having a son and this kind of thing. So there was one man who ordained. He had been married and then was attracted to the Dharma, so he left the marriage, got ordained, and then his parents write him And they say, you left us without an heir. You're our only son. You didn't have a son. Who's going to do all these rites and rituals after we die? We need an heir. This is your family obligation. We're suffering. So he went back and had sex with his wife so that she conceived and had a son. And in his mind, he thought, I'm doing what makes my parents happy. I'm doing what my parents want. They asked me to do this, and they were suffering. No, that's not a good reason to have sex if you're ordained. That's not a good reason. You know, that was the precept that made that was the story that made the precept be formed. It was quite interesting, huh? Okay, you had a question? Okay, my teacher, the way Lamayesh used to do that, he used to say, if you know where that animal is going to be reborn, and you know that it's going to have a happier rebirth, then, okay, you can kill it. But if you don't know where it's going to be reborn, and you don't know if it's going to be happier after its life has ended, then is that really compassion to kill it?
So that's just the suffering maybe better than living.
Yes, and also, in cases of euthanasia, who's the one that's really suffering, whose suffering we can't bear? Yeah, isn't it? I can't bear to see them suffer. Yeah. Whereas nowadays, just as there's comfort measures for human beings, there's comfort measures for animals.
But I mean, suppose the drag's in a really sweet animal accident, but hit by a car and half dead.
If you saw a person half dead in the middle of the road, why don't you euthanize the person?
Because there's a hospital, like, 911 to call and hospitals.
You can also pick up the dog and take it to a vet. Yeah. Or if it's injured too much, you can leave it there. You can get out of your vehicle and say mantras and, say things to put some positive imprint on the creature's mind stream and tell him to take a precious human life or be born in the Pure Land. Yeah. Yeah. That's usually what it is. Yeah. Yeah, because our cats here, well, the two founding cats are not the two cats we have now. Yeah. But they were both quite sick. The thought, it was interesting because they both died in retreat when we were having retreats going on. And somebody after that said, oh, I was really surprised that, you could have euthanized them and you didn't. And I realized the thought never even entered my mind to euthanize them. Never even entered my mind. Yeah? And they had quite remarkable deaths, didn't they? Yeah? I mean, when Achi died, Achala, we wanted him, we thought he'd be more comfortable in his own room, He kept coming out, this is when we were still in Ananda, into the dining room. He wanted to be there with everybody. And so everybody would walk past and say mantra and say texts, and he heard all the chanting while he was dying. He wanted to be there with everybody. Yeah? That's quite remarkable. I won't go into the whole story, but yeah.
So not just doing it just for the sake of argument, but my own family recently encountered this situation like this where someone on life support, not in a conscious state,
Mm-hmm.
So life only being sustained by external
Yeah.
kind of routines, what you do in that situation.
Yeah. This is something that's really difficult, I think, and that's why I think sometimes to check before putting somebody on life support if it's really necessary, if there's really any hope, or are we just putting people on life support on automatic because that's what you do. But to me, what that points out to is the importance of having a living will, and really stating what you want so that your family doesn't have to decide. And this came up very strongly just a couple of months ago. Venerable Chuni's mother, she got the phone call, as we call it, and her mother had fallen in some way or another in the house and landed in such a way that part of the spine penetrated into the brain, and they took her to ER, they put her on life support, they lowered the temperature of her body in an effort to reduce the trauma of the body, and then heated it up the next day. And basically, she had died. Yeah, because I think by the time they got there and the CPR was effective, it was more, what was it, like more than 15 minutes or something, 10 or 20 minutes, something. It took a while, so her mom was without oxygen for a while. But very fortunately, the mother had, had an advance directive and said, if I'm in this kind of state, don't keep me alive. The doctor still said to them, let's wait another day, when it was clear that probably she was dead from the time she fell. Yeah? But the doctor couldn't let go. Finally, her mom's husband said, look, we have to do what she wanted. And, she's gone anyway. And so then they took her off the life support. His Holiness usually says, it's a difficult situation because on one hand, so much money and so much resources are being used, and you're not really even sure if the person is there. Like this court case in Texas, with this woman who was brain dead, and she was pregnant, and they were keeping her alive when she was dead, and when the baby also had been deprived of oxygen. So those kinds of things, I it doesn't seem like killing to me. Because a person's already dead, even though they're on life support. The difficulty is when, they can't breathe on their own, but they're not totally dead yet. Yeah. But you were saying that tell about Dr. Rinpoche, what he said.
Well, there was that place about the young woman who
Terry Shav, yeah.
her addiction and others, like people who were even though she had some signs of activity, he said those were just like reflexes, more complicated than these kind of reflexes. He said she was first, mind was already gone. So it was just like the electrical activity was happening too much of it was in her.
Oh, it's difficult.
It was hard. I remember seeing the video of her.
Yes.
There were times where her mind was in a way where you thought, oh, there might be something there. But then you also can, just come around that stuff. You also, both your eyes move around sometimes, and just the fun and stories about unconscious or experiencing things. It's hard to know.
Mm-hmm. Very, very hard to know.
So we watched the movie once about hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's just been very difficult for me to figure out that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do we still have that? Might be interesting if people want to see it. Okay, yeah, because maybe people want to watch that together. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the agency of the precept is
Mm-hmm.
other things that you in general,
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so suicide is also a transgression. But it's interesting, it's not a full transgression, because to have a full transgression, the person who you kill has to die before you do. If it's suicide, that doesn't happen. Yeah?
Someone who was shot in the back, is that not the
Yeah. That's what they say. Because, yeah, it's interesting. And the reason they would say that is because at the time you died, it wasn't certain that that person was going to die. And so that karma, wouldn't be accumulated on you being the person right now who shot him. Yeah, it would still be heavy karma. The precept about killing animals, my guess is that probably came in, it's clearly a branch of this one. It's not a root transgression like killing a human being is. There's probably another origin story for that, yeah, but also not killing animals. The one for lying is also interesting, to show us that it's because you would think the lying one, somebody made up some just really outrageous thing and got a lot of money from it, or did, something like that. Okay, the origin story is that there was a famine in the land, and so it was very, very hard for, when the Sangha went out for Pindapat, they didn't get many offerings. So at the end of the time, the time of the famine, the Buddha met with some monks who were very plump and healthy looking, and he said, there was a famine in the land. What happened? I'm happy, you look so good. What happened? And they said, well, yeah, there was a famine. It was very difficult to get food. So we told people that we were arhats and that we had special magical powers and things like that. And then they thought we were holy beings, and they gave us their food. Yeah. And the Buddha said, that isn't kosher. Yeah. And so therefore there's the precept, the root precept is lying about your spiritual attainments. Yeah, and saying that you have attainments that you don't have, and therefore tricking and deceiving people. And so to me that's pointing out, yeah, especially lying about spiritual attainments is so dangerous when you're a Sangha member. Yeah, more dangerous than lying about other things, because it really deceives the lay people and gives them false faith and gives you income that is not yours at all. Yeah. So it's interesting to see these origin stories and how they work. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, there were individual situations that came up that were the source of the precepts. And then when other situations came up and people tried to keep the precept exactly, but it brought about other complications, those were brought to the attention of the Buddha, and he started saying, yeah, you do this, but in such and such a situation you don't do, you do the opposite. And so it began to be refined upon what actually were the boundaries or the limits that constituted, transgressions. And so you began to see that it depended on a lot of different situations. The Buddha also, in addition to precepts that in which he said, don't do this, okay, the prescribed activities, whether they were naturally negative or ones that he had simply prescribed. In addition to those, then there were the prescribed precepts. In other words, the things that the Sangha should do. Yeah, and so these include the posada ceremony, which we'll be doing on Sunday. And it's the fortnightly time where the Sangha comes together. We reveal to each other what precepts we have broken, and then we read the precepts together, and you're only allowed to attend if you have confessed and you are considered pure in your precepts. Then you can attend the reading of the precepts. So it's a fortnightly thing, and it's a really wonderful ceremony because it brings all of us together in a way where we have to be open and transparent with each other, and where we're really given an opportunity to purify our transgressions. So on that day, the lay people, we just started doing this, just actually a couple of months ago, having the lay people come in during part of it when we do some of the chanting, and then you go out and read the 5 precepts and take the refuge ceremony, renew your refuge, renew your 5 precepts on your own. So that will be on Sunday. Another one of the prescribed precepts, things that the Sangha should do, is the annual retreat. Traditionally it's held during the summer months because in India they had the monsoon climate, and so to avoid trampling the crops, and that's when all the bugs come out, so avoid killing all the bugs. Then the Sangha would stay in one place for 3 months. In the West, we've changed it into a snows retreat instead of a rains retreat. It doesn't fulfill the same purpose, but in the sense of not walking around and not killing insects and so on. But that's really, at least in our climate, the obvious time to do retreat, because it's cold, it's quiet, you want to stay indoors, you can't do outside work anyway. So we changed it to that time. So that ceremony is called the Varsa. Yeah, the fortnightly confession is called Posada. So there's the Varsa. At the end of the Varsa, then there's another ceremony called the Pravarana, which means invitation. And so when you're doing the Varsa, that 3-month retreat, one thing, usually the Sangha admonishes each other, and if you see somebody doing something that's not so cool, you go to that person and you say, dear brother or sister, there's a precept about this, and this action that you just did, how did that relate to this precept, and kind of helping each other by admonishing each other in that way. But during the time of the Varsa, we don't do that. Yeah, we don't point out to each other any transgressions, although the rest of the year we do. So at the end of that 3 months, then there, in the invitation ceremony, the Pravarana, then each person invites the rest of the Sangha. Please tell me, if you saw, heard, or suspected of me committing any transgressions. Yeah, so you invite your peers to give you feedback and to point things out. Well, that's the concluding ceremony for the Varsa. Another ceremony that that is also very nice. These ceremonies, we did the Varsa and the Pravarana for the first time this last year, and some nuns from Taiwan came over especially just to teach us how to do them, and So we had a crash course in 3 or 4 days. I mean, they were so kind to come all that way to teach us. And but we found the ceremonies really quite meaningful, and really getting you to stop and think and appreciate being with the Sangha. And and so then there's another ceremony that comes after the pravarana, because after you've completed the varsa, the retreat, and done the pravarana, then it's said that you are filled with merit. That your merit stock just went up on the Dow Jones, way high. So at the time of the Buddha, it was very difficult for people to find cloth for robes. Very difficult. They would just find scraps at the side of the roadside and stitch it together. They would go into cemeteries and take the shrouds off of the corpses and wash the fabric and dye it and stitch it together. That's why our robes have all these patches in them. The fully ordained people's robes have many patches, because it represents that thing of taking all these rags and you stitching them together, and that became your robe. So it was usually very hard to find robes. So the Buddha, after the pravarana, said, okay, if you do the katina ceremony, then you can have special privileges that allow you to keep, cloth that you've accumulated for your robes longer, and to not have to carry all of your robes with you when you traveled, and so on. There were some special privileges like this. So the katina ceremony itself, what happens is either the lay people either offer fabric, and then the Sangha before the sunrise of the next day makes it into a robe, or the lay people offer a robe, and then it is, in either way, you come out with a new robe, and it's given to one of the Sangha members who is seen as somebody high in virtue and somebody who needs a robe. Okay, so also it's a very nice ceremony. In the Theravada tradition, this ceremony has become a huge thing in the village, and it's become a time where people come and they just give all sorts of things to the Sangha, not just cloth, but it's kind of like Sangha Christmas Day. Yeah. And they have parades, elephants come, and people bring so many offerings, and so it's seen as a real, what they call merit-making day or opportunity. Okay, then there, every time, going back to the prohibitive precepts, where the Buddha said, these are things that you should not do. Every time he set up one of those precepts, he stated the overall general reason for establishing precepts. Okay, so this is really important to understand. Why did the Buddha establish precepts? Because some people, especially those who grew up in a Judaic-Christian culture, see precepts as thou shalt not kind of things, and if you do, you're going to hell kinds of things. And that's not at all the idea behind precepts in a Buddhist sense. Okay? Again, the Buddha, when he made up the precepts, it was because of specific situations, and also because he could see, like even in the example of the 5 lay precepts, because he could see the karma of individual beings, and when beings had happiness, then he could see what was the specific kind of action they did that created the karmic cause for that happiness. And those actions were then called virtuous or wholesome. When sentient beings suffered, he could see the kinds of actions they did that brought on that suffering. He called those actions non-virtuous or unwholesome. So here we see that things are virtuous, non-virtuous, wholesome, not unwholesome, not in and of themselves, not inherently, but only in relationship to the result that they bring. Okay? So it's very different in Christianity. God, without any prompting, set up these rules and gave them to Moses, and that was it. Okay? Yeah, and God's going to punish you if you break them. In Buddhism, it's nothing at all like that. And this is another area where, as Westerners, we really need to look into our mind and see previous conditioning, and if it's hiding somewhere in our mind where we're still seeing these things as thou shalt not, and you're getting punished, and you're evil, and you're a sinner, because that is not at all the context in Buddhism. Okay? And so in Buddhism, the idea of taking precepts is that we need help. Yeah? That we can see that certain actions bring damage, but we also know that our minds are full of afflictions, and it's so easy that we can do those actions. Yeah? So as a way to help us restrain our energy and not just act according to these impulses that enter our mind, then we take precepts. Okay? So precepts are our friend. They're not imposed from an outside authority. We take them voluntarily. If we don't want to abide by them, we don't take them. It's totally 100% our choice. Yeah? There's no threat. Yeah? Of you're going to hell and I'm sending to hell and you're a sinner if you break them. There's none of that. Okay? It's just very much, if you do this kind of action, you get that kind of result. And then we choose. Do I want that kind of result? And is doing this kind of action, am I willing to do, is doing this action worth getting that result? Okay, that's in terms of the negative actions. Of course, it works the same way with our virtuous actions. Yeah, if we want these kind of results, then we do these kinds of actions, or we abandon doing the non-virtuous ones, because even just restraining ourselves from doing the non-virtuous ones is considered a virtuous action. As well as doing the opposite of the non-virtuous ones. So, for example, just restraining yourself from killing is virtuous. Yeah. And in addition, if you actively protect life, that's also virtuous. Okay? So, we take precepts because we cannot keep them perfectly. If we could keep them perfectly, we don't need them. Yeah? Because all these precepts are trainings. Yeah? They're training. Their purpose is to train our mind. The purpose of precepts is not, there is this high standard, and how am I ever going to reach that standard? And if I don't, I'm a disaster. It's not like that. It's these precepts are for training. They're set out to help us because we need that support. And when we make a determination not to do something in the presence of the Buddha, in the presence of the Sangha, it gives us more energy to restrain ourselves. Yeah? And when you live in a Sangha community and everybody's trying to do the same thing and not do certain things, then it really helps you to steer your energy in the way that you want it to go. Yeah? So sometimes we do fall down. We break our precepts. We're sentient beings whose minds are overwhelmed by afflictions. That's why we have the Posada ceremony. That's why we come together every 2 weeks and we confess. And we tell each other, we reveal to each other what we've done. We have regret for it. Okay? And then we recite the precepts again, we unify ourselves as a community, and then we go on. Okay? So it's all a way of training. So it's very, very different than Christianity and theistic religions. And we really have to throw out that theistic model. It doesn't apply here at all. Okay, yeah.
What if we notice that we're feeling, we identify something we've done as a negative action, but we're not able to like cultivate that feeling of regret fully. It just doesn't feel like really, you know what I mean? In order to kind of apply the antidote.
Yeah. So then you kind of have to look and say, okay, part of my mind still thinks this action was good. You know, there's one part of my mind that's saying, you just broke a precept. And the other part of the mind says, but. Yeah, this really felt good, or I really needed to do it, or it was for the other person's benefit, but we actually know it's a rationalization. You know, so there's one part of our mind going, but. Okay? Then to stop and look at that part of the mind and say, okay, what's going on there? Yeah, what am I holding on to? Why? What was the pleasure I experienced? Or what did I get out of doing this action that I think is so positive? And, you know, really look at what we did. And we had some reason thinking it was positive, or thinking that, you know, I really needed to do that. And then just, you know, going back, well, what was going on in me that I felt I really needed to do that? Yeah, was that a virtuous state of mind? Was that a non-virtuous state of mind? What was really going on there? Yeah, and so using that as an opportunity to do research in our own, you know, on our own mind, our own mental state, to get some clarity about, you know, why we're kind of fudging along the way here. Okay? And you do that, you know, not with this harsh, judgmental mind of, you broke a precept, you're a sinner, why don't you want to confess? You know, it's like, give me a break, okay? Yeah, get rid of that mind. It is a useless, ridiculous mind that is actually a hindrance on the path. Because you can't practice Dharma when you talk to yourself like that. Yeah? You have to have some kind of understanding and compassion for yourself. I'm like, what was going on in my mind that I thought that was okay? Or what is still going on in my mind that I somehow want to justify doing that? Okay? Anybody have an example they want to share?
Yeah. I was just going to ask if I could. Okay, police officer pulled me over, and I know my friend's got a pipe in his pocket. Yeah, drugs in it. How I know. Yeah, I'd lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
But see, my motivation is I don't want my friend to get busted and be pissed at me for it. Yeah, I could have maybe avoided that if I was a friend who got the car and no drugs in the car.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard situation because you don't want your friend to get busted. But like you said, you know, I mean, you came up with your own antidote already. It's like, oh, you know, I know this friend takes drugs. I really should have said something to him before we got in the car. Because also, it endangers you to be in a car with somebody who has drugs, because they're going to haul you in as well. Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting. It's like, yeah, I don't want my friend to get busted and be mad at me.
Then another
Sure.
This is something more obvious. Say the paramilitary police show up and they want to disappear somewhere else.
And what you've hidden under your floor. Okay.
Yeah, they want to disappear somewhere. So they want to grab them in the face. And the police are coming in and there's a fascist regime.
Oh, okay. The police are the fascist regime, and you're hiding somebody, and you say they're not there. In that case, I think your motivation is actually, it's to save life, isn't it? Yeah. So you can say they're not there, or you can change the subject, or you can say, who in the world are you talking about? There's ways to get around that, sometimes without telling a direct lie. But, yeah, it's deceiving. But in that kind of case, you're protecting life. And you're protecting those people from committing the negative action of killing. Yeah. So it's like if a hunter comes up here and says, oh, I just saw a deer, which way did he go? We don't go right over there. Yeah. We say, what are you talking about? Come and have a cup of tea. There's no hunting on our property anyway. Did you hear about, what do you think about the Ebola epidemic? You're not a Republican, are you? No, we don't ask that question. Yeah. Okay. Because in the example you gave, the lie was not out of self-centered interest. It was actually to protect life. And to protect the others from creating negative karma. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of the things like that, most of them are hypothetical. I know like that knocks on my door. But when I imagine those kind of situations, even in imagining them, I always have kind of selfish aspects of looking at them and thinking, your way is wrong, my way is right. So not only am I trying to save life, but I'm protecting my own opinion and my own point of view, and that all gets easily wrapped up here. Even if it was something really good.
Yeah.
I have a very hard time separating them.
Yeah. So, you're saying even if something is virtuous, your own self-interest gets wrapped up because this is my way of doing it, my view, and so on. So in those kind of situations, you have to reorient your motivation and make it, keep working with your motivation and make it really for the benefit of saving that person's life, not for, to prove your viewpoint or anything. Okay, you have to switch your motivation and get rid of the aspect of it that's self-centered. I can tell you a story about that later. Yeah.
Later on, I learned as a young adult that the citizens who are living around that area mostly knew what was going on. They smelled it, the foam on the furniture. It was kind of visible. It was clear, but there was this heavy system and there's so much anxiety around it that things went along with it. So, and I'm just wondering, it also happens in our society with different kind of things that happens in different planners in different areas. Not to be part of causing
Yeah, that's a very good point, that when you're in some of these very difficult situations where there's a lot of peer pressure to not speak about certain things that are negative, when you yourself could actually be in danger if you do speak about it. Those are really very, very difficult situations. And it's hard to live with a sense of integrity in those. Yeah? And so, each person, we have to look inside of ourselves and say, okay, what is more important to me in this kind of situation? Yeah? And also when we make some of these hypothetical situations, we usually make them very black and white where there's no alternatives. Usually in real life, there are some alternatives. Like in the example you gave, okay, those people knew what was going on in the camps. Of course, if you said something there, they might arrest you and throw you in haul you off to Auschwitz as well. But maybe there's a way in which you could leave the country and then speak about it. But then there's attachment. Oh, I don't want to leave the country. My home and possessions and everything is here. Yeah? And so then there's the attachment, but I want to stay here with my home and my possessions and my relatives. But then there's the moral imperative of, I don't feel comfortable turning a blind eye to this kind of thing. I need to get myself out of this environment so that I can speak freely about it. These are very difficult situations where people have to overcome a lot of attachment to live a life with integrity. Yeah.
Question about something we were reading about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the words are used like say something on the shame that I wouldn't reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And to me there's a part of that really works, and that is a part of our mind that doesn't want to reveal things, and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have this kind of confidence of this and about this willingness to grow. And there's another part where I think the same part that comes in is shame. Shame is kind of like that, that I'm not doing
Okay. Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons we don't use the word shame at the Abbey. Okay. Because yeah, that's why we don't use those words. Because the word shame or ashamed can have, there's two kinds of shame. Yeah. One kind of shame is I'm awful, I'm defective, what I did was horrible, this real heavy self-loathing kind of shame. And almost bordering on the thing of I am inherently defective and irredeemable. Okay? There's another meaning of shame, which you find more in an Asian context, somewhat in the West, where shame can also mean where you kind of have a responsibility towards a group, and instead of fulfilling a virtuous responsibility, you're being very selfish. And so you feel bad. That kind of shame. Okay? So those are two very different kinds of shames. Because the second kind of shame is good. We had a responsibility, we were being selfish, and so we feel kind of shame in front of the other people because of the way we acted. Whereas the first kind of shame is I'm inherently defective, this is irredeemable. So because that word, or those two words, shame and ashamed, can have those two different meanings, and it's so confusing, therefore we don't use it here. And that's why we translate it, as the virtuous mental factor is a sense of integrity. Yeah, I have responsibility, not only to other people, but to myself. I want to think of myself as a good person. And if I do that kind of action, then I don't like myself very much. But I really want to respect myself. Yeah? And so that sense of integrity is very virtuous. Okay? So that's why, one of my friends who translates from Chinese into English, and he sent me these beautiful translations he does. He uses the word shame, and I wrote him and I said, that's really such a bad word to use and so confusing. And he wouldn't budge, and many Tibetan translators too, because that, is one meaning of the word, and maybe they looked it up in the dictionary the first time and that's what came out. But it's, I really think it's much more a sense of personal integrity. Yeah? And then conscientiousness is, you value ethical conduct. Yeah, that's a virtuous mind too. You value ethical conduct as a principle. So you want to act according to it. And okay, sometimes, our afflictions get very strong and we kind of say, well, that's not really an ethical principle. It's really not such a big thing. It doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to see it. It's not really harming anybody anyway. Yeah. And then we do it. But then in the back of our mind, there's this little, and that's the one we have to look at and say, okay, what was I really thinking? That clear it up? Yeah.
I think that's what I really need to be clear about. Because I've heard this expressed this over 3 times, and it's always like, I've just been asking myself about this for a while. There's a part of it that you can do in a wholesome way, and there's a part of it you can kind of bring things into it.
Part of
this wish not to reveal.
This wish not to reveal. So you have to look and why don't I want to reveal this? Is it because it would damage other people? Or is it because I'm afraid of what they're going to think about me? Yeah. 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 Because I know there's many things, this will probably come up in our discussion this afternoon. There's things in my life that I wanted to reveal, and my family didn't want to hear. Yeah? So, then it's the opposite kind of thing.